Welcome to Sex Crimes Defense Podcast with Chance and Jay. Chance Oberstein is a defense attorney who handles sex crimes in California. I'm a media professional. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. Chance, we're on part 3 of Jeffrey Epstein, and we were just talking about the files, and I think it's probably time to talk more about political connections, money, influence, power, and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Well, probably so, but maybe just, remind, because now we're in part 3. So we should talk a little bit about maybe the fallout from his convictions, just a little bit. For instance, the victims, over 36 girls identified by federal investigators, some as young as 14 years old. Accomplices, which we're going to get into in a minute. Ghislaine Maxwell, his longtime associate, was convicted in 2021 for helping recruit and groom victims. And then ongoing investigations, public and political pressure continues to mount for transparency about Epstein's connections and alleged client lists, which we were just talking about in the prior episode. Why is this so significant? It's because this case remains one of the most explosive scandals in recent history, which we have talked about just a moment ago. And it's not just for the crimes, because sex trafficking crimes may be common. A lot of people have been prosecuted for them, but it's really for the unanswered questions about who else may have been involved, which is what we were leading up to in the last episode. But what about Ghislaine Maxwell? Do you know who she is?
Well, and I want to say this, because you just made me think that before we talk about Ghislaine, is that this is kind of, I'm going to make a really weird analogy here, but that's okay. It's like Avengers Endgame. That movie tied together many other plots. And one of the things you find with the Epstein list of association, you find Weinstein, which we've seen that movie. Still
We've
going.
We've seen it.
Right. Kevin Spacey. We've seen that movie.
Right.
Right. And Bill Clinton. Okay. We saw that movie. Right. Kind of.
Presidentially.
Ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and there's many, many more. I mean, Bill Gates is on this list. Chris Tucker, he's an actor. There's just some pictures with him. And actually, I wonder is, what's it like to be Chris Tucker every time one of these pictures pops up? What does he got to go through? I haven't heard anything negative about him. I think he's a great actor. I'm not worried about it. Naomi Campbell, even I think Epstein's attorney Alan Dershowitz is accused of being on the island.
There's a whole bunch of people that have great anxiety over this. But
which again adds to the motive of suicide.
It does. It goes right there. It just strikes right there. But let's take a step back for a moment. Let's examine Ghislaine Maxwell. Who is she? She's a British former socialite who became infamous for her role in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation. What's her background? Well, one, she was born in 1961 in France, and she was raised in Oxford, England. She's the youngest daughter of media tycoon Robert Maxwell, whose mysterious death in 1991 triggered a financial scandal. I mean, there lies the foundation. Her education, she attended, I think it's Balliol College in Oxford, and she became a fixture in London and New York high society, often seen at elite events with powerful figures, just the right piece and component for Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Her father, Robert Maxwell, I mean, his death is so shifty. I think he was killed.
Well, that's why I say there's these basic foundations and these parallels. I mean, look at her connection to Jeffrey Epstein. She's his longtime companion, of course. We're talking about her dad, and now we're talking about Epstein. He becomes her companion. This is all just weird. And then an alleged romantic partner. And then Prosecutors say she recruited and groomed underage girls for him, sometimes participating in the abuse herself. So it's in a weird kind of strange way. It kind of makes sense how those two came together.
This is literally important to this podcast episode because as people of the public, we've seen pictures of the two of them together. This goes back to before I did homework on Epstein, before the internet sleuthing. You see these pictures and you're like, who are these people? Why? I mean, they look normal or ish. So how or what are we talking about? And I think what we're seeing, what we don't understand, is that Epstein pretends to continue to be having a relationship with her to satisfy her desire to be with him, but he's really just using her to recruit and groom, and she's voluntarily doing it.
I mean, even further than that. I mean, she's described, by survivors as the enforcer and the groomer, someone who orchestrated and enabled Epstein's crimes. I mean, how did she assist him? This is, you say this seems like a normal thing. You look at pictures, everything seems kind of rosy and nice and really functional. But think about what she did. Let's talk about what she did. I mean, look at recruitment and grooming. Let's just take a look at that from a legal eye. She was a trusted liaison. She posed as a friendly, trustworthy adult to young girls, often befriending them and gaining their confidence. And I'm sure you've seen lots of taped interviews of victims saying that. And then she took the victims shopping, discussed sexual topics, flattered them with promises of support for education or careers, right? Built up their hopes. And then when their hopes were high enough, she manipulated them. The victims testified that she normalized inappropriate behavior and created an environment where abuse could occur. Okay, so she started to form that in her relationship with them. And then, of course, she was the logistical and management aspect of Epstein's operation because she managed his properties, funny as that may seem, including arranging travel and accommodations for victims across locations like New York, Florida, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so she allegedly coordinated appointments and ensured Epstein's preferences were met, facilitating repeated abuse. She was the one who set everything up. She was the one who knew where these girls were connecting and with whom they were connecting to.
It's hard to believe, and yet it is the case. And in fact, plus, she introduced Epstein into royalty and other elite circles that he may not have otherwise made it into.
Almost definitely.
He was at the door, but she helped him walk through the door. And as a female, she made possible some of this grooming that there's no way a male would have got away with that much.
She used her father's influence in social circles to connect him to the right people. And that was what she did. And, when you look at it closely, in doing that, she was an intricate part of his operation, and she faced very serious legal consequences. I mean, she was arrested in July 2020 by the FBI. In December of 2021, she was convicted on 5 federal counts, including sex trafficking of minors, and she was sentenced to 20 years federal prison. Can you imagine?
So tell me, that's the thing. Okay, she got 20 years and he got 13 months. I mean, but is that still, should it have been more? Tell me more, because I'm lost on how to interpret this.
Well, you got to look at it in segments, okay? Because what she was convicted for and what he was sentenced on are two different things. But we have to ask ourselves before we do all that is why is she still significant? I mean, what's the big deal? Well, she's significant because, and the reason that that there's global attention attached to this whole issue, the reason why we're talking about it today is not just for the crimes, because again, the crimes are kind of a commonality. They're common. It's commonality. but for the powerful names allegedly connected to Epstein's network. That's why we're talking about it, because she's the only human source on the planet who has the exact same matrix and knows the exact same things that Epstein knew in his head or had put on paper or locked in a safe. Whatever, she knows them. She knows the names and she knows the connections. And she certainly knows when everything happened and where it occurred. She's a walking informational on everything you need to know, including, which is, I think, the most important thing here, and that is who was involved. Who were they? That she knows for sure.
So, yeah, you're bringing me to another dangerous ledge here because, or rather, I'm feeling that I'm walking towards the edge. If he was killed in custody in 2019, they're not going to kill her off. What are they going to do with her?
Well, I think that she probably at this point pretty much understands what happened to him. So she's not going to use. Of course she does. She's not going to try to do the same. It'd be damn stupid to try to use that as leverage, because that's a way of getting yourself killed. And if she stayed in prison for as long as she's sentenced to it, by the time she gets out, no one's going to care anyways, because everybody's going to be gone who's involved in it, just about. So prison was the next best thing, keeping her mouth shut, because, on the potential threat of, being whacked is another thing. She could just sit there for all that time and be very, very, very quiet. In the meantime, she's not. Okay, she's not, because she's not looking to rat people out. She's looking to find a friendly court that will make a decision based on her situation and how she got there in the first place. Let me explain. Yeah, it takes a little bit of explaining.
Yeah.
She's currently incarcerated at FCI Tallahassee, Florida, and she's appealing her conviction to the United States Supreme Court. So that's important, because the basis of her appeal is what's fascinating. What it is this. She, her appeal hinges on a provocative legal argument that she was protected by Epstein's 2007 non-prosecution agreement, which I'll refer to as an MPA, and therefore her 2021 conviction should be overturned. They weren't supposed to, she's saying, they weren't supposed to prosecute me. You're not supposed to prosecute me. I wasn't supposed to be prosecuted because I'm a cooperator.
You're actually right. That's part of the non-prosecution agreement that he took. You're right.
He in 2007, he signed with federal prosecutors in Florida. He signed it there. It promised not to prosecute him or his potential co-conspirators if he fulfilled the terms. That's what it was. And her legal...
Did he fulfill the terms?
They're not even going on that. Her legal team argues that the phrase "the United States" in the co-conspirator clause means the agreement applies nationwide, not just in Florida. And, that
just going to bring depositions of the state attorney and et cetera.
Well, here's the thing. This conversation is bringing us closer to close on this episode. But what she's saying is that this agreement should have barred a prosecution in New York. In other words, what happened in Florida should have precluded New York from prosecuting her. Okay, and so you have to ask then, okay, how have these claims been handled historically? And interesting enough, the circuit court, there's a circuit split, and there is a Supreme Court interest in this, because there's been conflicting rulings. And this is when the Supreme Court gets involved, when there's no unification. There's a split on this. Federal appeals courts are split on whether plea agreements made by the U.S. Attorney's Office bind others across the country. So, does an agreement made in Florida tie the hands of a New York prosecutor so they can't prosecute either? That's the question. And so her petition says And she's asking the Supreme Court to resolve this circuit split. Some courts go one way and say it does bind them. Some courts say another. It doesn't. Okay, so she's arguing that these are inconsistent interpretations which undermine the integrity of federal plea deals. That's what her whole thing is about. It has nothing to do with cooperation, information, or any of that. Notice that's completely void here. What she's asking for is for them to do an analysis of federal plea deals and whether or not she got screwed in this plea deal. So what's the government's response? Do you know? Have you read it?
So I'm going to say we're going to come back for part 4. Hopefully part 4 of 4 on the Epstein situation. Join us for part 4 on Sex Crimes Defense Podcast with Chance and Jay.